Hey guys, I'm here with the Cranky Connection, and I'm sitting with Brian Lauer of Messick, Lauer and Smith. Welcome.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Great to have you. This is, I think, your second venture with us.
I think that's right. First one in person, maybe.
First one in person, right. So we're at NCUA, Reimagine, which has been, I thought, an awesome theme. This morning, however, it's been broken up a little bit by the news that the NCUA is now down to one chairman.
Seems that the NCUA is being reimagined.
Exactly. There you go. Fits right in. And then they had the scenario planning exercise, so that was great.
Correct.
So, Brian, question for you as a legal guy, legal eagle. What's happening? I mean, some people were asking me about the constitutionality of removing them. You know, what happens to the seats then, that kind of stuff. What is your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, sure. So the NCUA is in fact a independent agency. There are several of them in the executive branch. The idea being that Congress formed the agency to be a part of the executive branch, but independent from the politics of the executive branch. So in other words, the focus of those agencies are pretty stable. And in the financial services area, that's generally a good thing, right? Stability is a good thing. So when you talk about the constitutionality of this, it was an act of Congress that formed the NCUA. Within that act, it states that the NCUA board members will serve a 6-year term. They cannot be removed except for with cause. So there will absolutely be litigation surrounding these firings. I guess I should say, for those that don't know,
right? Yes.
The board member Harper and board member Otsuka were terminated or removed from the agency board by the Trump administration today.
And they're the two Democratic positions on the board. So I'm thinking, you know, obviously there's Doge going around. Everybody knows about that, you know, where they're downsizing agencies. Do you think this is that, or do you think this is political, or both?
I actually think this is probably more political than it is Doge.
Mm-hmm.
The NCUA is an independent agency, and it also is not part of the appropriations. So, which means that it's not an act of Congress that is funding the budget of the NCUA. It's actually assessments from the credit unions that they regulate that funds the agency. So there's not really Doge-like reductions in cost. Now, Doge did, I understand, go into the NCUA, but I think that was probably more on the efficiency side rather than the saving of budgetary funds. I think this was probably more political, similar to what happened at the FTC and at the National Labor Relations Board. The Trump administration does seem to have the philosophy and approach that every agency under the executive branch should not be independent from the way he politically and philosophically wants the government to be run. And so by removing the Democratic board members from the NCUA and other boards that I just described, he's looking, I believe, to try and fill positions on those boards with individuals that will carry out his political philosophy.
And some of those have been reinstated, I believe, by a judge. I thought I read this morning. I was reading about that.
The litigation is back and forth. I'm not sure what the latest status is at
right.
the FTC. I think the National Labor Relations Board, they're being litigated actually in different courts. So it's not all one case. So and judges are actually, acting in different manners. So there may have been some reinstatements. There may have been some stays of the removals. It will most certainly go all the way to the Supreme Court to determine whether the firings were constitutional.
Right.
So we will likely see the same thing with regard to these firings at the NCUA, but there's a question of whether board member Harper and Otsuka have the funds and proclivity to sue. They don't have to sue, but it would be on them.
Mm-hmm. And so the agency now can't do anything, which is good and bad, I guess. They aren't going to be putting out some big, heavy regs. But they also, go ahead.
Yeah, for the foreseeable future, the agency will not be able to take any official board action.
So they can't remove a reg either.
They can't remove regs. They can't institute regs. They can institute guidance. They can't have a board meeting.
Right.
You're not allowed to have a board. The NCUA is not permitted to have a board meeting without a quorum, and a quorum is a majority of the board, and there's only one.
Right.
Presumably, unless they take the position that the board is one now, and so there's always a quorum, but I don't think that's how it's going to work. They're not going to be able to meet or take any action. It will be really more stagnation, and Chairman Hoffman will be handcuffed. He won't be able to really do much.
And this is Wednesday. Tomorrow would have been the board meeting.
Correct.
And I think, that, to take it full circle there, one of the items on the agenda was going to be the DOGE move as far as slimming down the agency and creating efficiencies there.
Yes, I think that's right. I do think that the chairman will have some ability to still act on reductions in staff, because the chairman of the board, regardless of the makeup of the board, has the control of the agency by statute. So the chairman really runs the agency, and then it's the board that's only acting on board level decisions.
Right.
So my assumption is that Chairman Hoffman will still work toward or move toward those staff reductions that have been announced around the JAC.
Mm-hmm. And since they can't have a quorum, and he is the quorum, he can't talk to himself.
Yeah, right. Sunshine Act in the shower, right?
Yeah. Anyway, so as far as implications, there have been a couple of things that have been talked about. Obviously, yes, DOGE. I don't think, for all the government is in debt, the staff of those two board members is not making up that 36 trillion dollars.
Right. And again, not funded by
the federal government anyway.
Yeah.
Which calls into question, can DOGE go in there?
So I think there's a lot of questions around DOGE that are being bandied about, and I think there are some litigation, some court cases, some litigation out there with regard to DOGE and whether they can go into different agencies. I'm not an expert on that
right.
aspect of the law as to whether they can go into an agency or not. All I can say in this context is that my understanding is that they did, in fact, go into the agency, and they are there trying to work on efficiencies for the government, for that agency as well. But it's not clear, whether they have the authority to hire and fire like they've done in some of the more traditional agencies.
And it's really interesting because the independent agencies were set up independently, so they would be free of the political swings, we'll call it, BS, that goes on. So, and now they're all up in the politics of it at the NCUA. But also with that, the credit unions, are we just stagnant? How can they plan for anything as far as their compliance, their regulation, that kind of stuff?
Right. Yeah. So I think that there are a lot of rules on the books right now that you need to still comply with. Compliance is still a thing, and enforcement will continue. Exams will continue, and the like. So you can't act as though the NCUA doesn't exist anymore. It still exists in its current form. This is really more around the rulemaking and policy decisions of the NCUA that will be stagnant.
Right.
Meaning that if there are rules, like you said earlier, if there are rules you don't like, there aren't going to be changes to those. And if there are rules that you do like, they're not going to be implemented, right?
Chairman Hoffman voted against the succession planning rule, was the one in my head.
Yeah.
And then also, in addition to DOGE and slimming down the government, there was talk, I'm not sure where the status is now, of merging the banking regulators together. And I know Treasury Secretary came out and said he's not in favor of that. But yeah, if he has to, President Trump would have to appoint at least one Democrat to the board. Now he could pick somebody who's more centric. So he might get easier to get his policy decisions and persuasions in effect at the agency. But yeah, to get rid of both of them, I'm kind of thinking, is he still going to look at merging those agencies together?
Yeah. So first, you're absolutely right. There is, as part of the Independent Agency Act, or the Act and the Independent Agency, there are always two members of one party and one member of the other party from a political appointee perspective on the NCUA board. And in fact, Todd Harper was appointed by President Trump in his first term. as the Democrat, sitting on the board with both Rodney Hood and Kyle Harper. So they will likely, in the sort of more standard approach, they will likely be looking to nominate 2 new board members that are more in line with President Trump's political philosophy, even at the with the Democratic wing. But I do think that this sort of chaotic approach to or these firings and the chaos that it creates does in fact make you think that maybe this is one step toward the consolidation of the agencies. It's been discussed with regard to the FDIC as well, which is another independent agency, that maybe the FDIC should come under Treasury, and so the NCUA could potentially fall into that realm as well. But you're right, the Treasury Secretary has said that he's not in favor of that. So, obviously he could be convinced potentially.
He serves at the will of the
he
president.
serves at the will of the president. That's correct. But for right now, I think we will look more toward the concept of appointing 2 new board members. But it does call into question how much authority even a reconstituted board will have, given the potential for litigation from the 2 fired board members. You could see a scenario where a reconstituted board is passing or taking away rules, right, like the succession rule you said, or maybe they're implementing rules, and if we figure out in litigation, or we come to find out in litigation that the courts say these terminations were not constitutional, are any of those rules or revocations of rules valid, right? So I do think we're going to be in no matter what, we're going to be in an extended period of uncertainty and instability.
Hurry up and wait.
Yes, exactly. And I should say too that now there's an argument that these firings were not constitutional, right? But I will also say that if the NCUA were to be folded into the Treasury, that would take an act of Congress in order to implement that. So it's not just an executive order.
Right. Well, and I was referencing the OTS when I forget who it was, took the woman who was the chairman at the time at the Office of Thrift Supervision and just removed her and then merged in the agency. So
correct, but that was part of an act of Congress. That was in the Dodd-Frank Act that OTS was eliminated. So while some may complain or argue that should or shouldn't have been done, it was done by Congress, which is what would happen.
All right, so we're at NCUSO. I'm going to totally change gears on you. And the theme has been NCUSO Reimagine. Obviously, like you said, they're reimagining the NCUA right now, but I see you, as JT mentioned earlier, you're the lawyer to all the CUSOs in the world, or your firm is. So how are you reimagining CUSOs and serving them?
That's a great question. So, we do represent quite a few credit unions and CUSOs in this space around the country. I think the latest trend is digital transformation. Credit unions using CUSOs and the CUSO powers to be able to invest in financial technology and invest in their delivery channels. It's been sort of the trend for the last 4 or 5 years, maybe even further back. But as the technology environment evolves, so does the CUSO environment with it. And so I think that is really where most of the evolution will occur.
Yeah. And what's been interesting, too, I've noticed in the last couple of years, at least, there are a lot of private companies that either spin off or become CUSOs as well, which is fascinating. People actually looking to serve credit unions with intent, right?
Right. Well, what's interesting is that a lot of private companies figured out that the credit union space is a great space to work in. It's much easier and more accessible than the banking space if you're in a B2B kind of a business. And once they encounter the credit union space, they're like, wow, I'd rather build and grow here first and then branch out into the banking space, for additional growth. And we're just good people to work with.
Awesome. Okay, I'll give you final thoughts. What do you want to leave our credit union audience with?
Well, I think the most important thing is to remember that we are still the same crediting industry we were before today, and we need to keep thinking about what the future is. You know, using QSOs to create non-interest income and innovate, and that's the most important thing. And the regulatory stuff, I think, will fall as the dust settles. We'll figure out where that is, but I think we'll be close to where we were before.
Yeah, and in the meantime, control what we can, right? Thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it, Brian.